Like we are live. Let's get our little show on the road here. Welcome to Evolution Hour. Sorry, I'm a little late, not because of restream this time, but just because I had a little bit of research to take care of that we definitely wanted to deal with. There's our little website. Everybody can get stuff off of it, all freebie. There's an awful lot of neat, keen stuff there. Joel Duff had just done a new video responding to the issues about his criticism of some creationists and Carl Werner on whether or not there were mammals of a modern sort existing back in dinosaur times and how that wasn't true. So I happened to catch that one and was watching that through because it was almost an hour long. And I thought it was worth getting out of the way because it required some adjustments, rewording of things in Volume 2 where the rocks were there, where the matter of surviving critters and modern forms in the fossil record is a little trope that occurs not just with the stuff that occurred with Carl Werner, but also with a variety. One Pelagia had encountered an example that we are calling attention to in the new book, keeping everything up to date. Plus, on the taxa that Duff was talking about, these dodecadonts, brand new paper popped up in Nature on a particular taxa that directly relates to the pointed issue. So I wanted him to kind of know about it and also to get my stuff out of the way. So our apologies for being just a whizzy bit late. So as you know, we are doing the ongoing wonderful world of this Creationist Titans book, which is beautifully illustrated and incredibly superficial. We're just now hitting like 200 sources in their book, and we're on like page 122. So we're running about 1.6 sources per page, which is not exactly gobsmacking. And a huge chunk of it is just creationist apologetics. Only a small portion of it, only about a quarter, are actually technical papers. And of those, a bit over half are misrepresented. Now, the two that we're going to be diving into today here are technically not in that category. I'm marking them down. They're not misrepresenting them, but the issue that they're evading is another matter. So what they're doing, they're concluding their ceratopsid section. Remember, they're talking about ornithischian dinosaurs in this chapter, and they have a first section on the ceratopsids, where they were wiffle-waffling, as we already noted, about protoceratopsids and psittacosaurids and all the rest on there. Triceratops is the last taxa and the only one in this block where they're offering a little bit of sources. The next section, then they'll be going into stegosaurids, so it'll be more funky little fun. Anyhow, they are ending them with the Triceratops. And their citations, too, relate only to the issue of whether or not Torosaurus, which is a smaller ceratopsid, might be a juvenile form of that Triceratops species. And there was a big back and forth that went on about 10 years ago from Scannella and Horner 2010, more like 15 years ago. And an opposing view by Marorino et al. 2013, which pretty much summarized the position that, no, they're distinct enough that they really ought to be regarded as separate species and not merely the juvenile form. Now, both of those papers I'll be putting up for links, but Scannella actually has a heck of a lot more stuff going on, and there was actually much more criticism of this than just this Marorino paper. There was one from Scannella and Horner in 2011, which was on a transitional Nedoceratops, and again going into the criteria that they were seeing as to whether or not that qualified. And then there was Longrich and Field, who were quite unconvinced of that viewpoint. So, and there's also a 2014 paper from Scannella that we'll be putting a link up to on the evolutionary trends in Triceratops generally. Now, where this gets into the fun and games part with these other papers is that ultimately they're dealing with the detailed biogeography and systematics of all these different taxa and how they relate together. And these Triceratopsids, Torosaurus has a different geographic range than Triceratops and a different temporal range as well. Now, how does that fit in with the creationist model? Can it be fit into the creationist model? presumably they're scrunching everything up so everything is simultaneous. And of course, we're also talking about a physical geographical relationship, because one of the things that stands out like a sore thumb about the distribution of critters in the late Cretaceous world is the fact that there's a bloody seaway running up to the middle of what is now the United States and Canada. So that means the taxa on one side of the fence can't get over the sea to the eastern side of what would eventually become East Canada and the United States. We have no clue whatsoever about the details of any creationist paleogeography. And quite to the contrary, Clary hypothesized, we alluded to this, I think, in previous episodes way back, that they've got this monstrous continental landmass where the seaway should be in this kind of dinosaur fiction that they come up with. Oh, hi, Slade. So that's a sidebar issue that anybody who wants to be interested in dinosaurs should be kind of keeping in mind of. Theoretically, there would have to be a paleo world that would have to be consistent with all the available geological and distributional material from the young creationist side. And I can tell you, the moment you start analyzing the detailed papers, like these ones on Triceratops, but way beyond that, one of the ones that we hope to bring up in volume 2 of Rocks Were There has to do with my neck of the woods. Eastern Washington, Oregon, Canada, Idaho, Montana, all of that area where there's a high beach, where there is one of the most intricate and complex paleogeological systems and ongoing debate. Who follows Nick Zentner, and if you don't, what the hell is wrong with you? I can guarantee you that his videos from Central Washington State University, some of which are presentations, and I know on our local PBS channels and that, and over on in Seattle as well, their little Nick on the Rock shows appear as little fillers on the tail end of programs and all that. But nevertheless, you've got a gazillion YouTube postings from the actual courses that he conducts, as well as these YouTube discussions with geologists on these technical material. Now, don't be intimidated by the technical end of it. I mean, you can just come into it from the fact that he provides sources for all of the things they're going to discuss, so they can go to the website and you can download the PDFs and look it up for yourself. But there's also a discussion of just the input about what's going on as to why things are the way they are. And lately they've been going on the Idaho batholith, which is the curious volcanic-y things, but it's not like a conventional volcanic arc, and trying to work out with a variety of geologists at the very cutting edge of the geological discussion in this area. So much so that the players in the field are just going, yeah, that's a thing, but maybe might connect up with that other stuff. So this is like the seed corn of what you're going to be seeing in research over the next few years. This stuff is so light years ahead of anything going on in the creationist setup from Snelling or the others. It is just hilarious. Oh yeah, you can watch that. I said the wonderful advantage about the YouTube thing is that you can watch it at your leisure. I often plead guilty on my co-author Jackson, because he does routine shows every week with various people, does stuff like the analysis of Bad Jackson, Charles Jackson stuff that he does with Dapper Dino, and he appears in a variety of contexts and has his own channel in that as well. And sometimes I'll dump in on those, and I have other things going afoot, and so I'll just put the little link so that I can get back to it later. And it cheats me from the ability to be in the live chat of those, but it also means that I can come in later at my leisure and make comments in the finished video comments section, as well as check out research material, because any of these things, if he's having discussions with technical people, I'm typically getting some stuff that I didn't already have in my data field that would need to be put in the data field. So the TIP project is a constantly expanding frame, the goal of which, and anybody who wants to help the project and become a patron of the channel, that will help a great deal, as well as getting the books, fiction and nonfiction. They're all fun reads, and the royalties help, kids. What can I say? Anyway, that all of that material means that the goal of our network that I'm part of with Jackson and Dan Stern Cardinale and Zach Hancock and Dapper Dino and Erica Gutsy Gibbon and all the various ones that are floating around in that a bit is to keep our data field so up to speed where each one of our specialties is connecting up with everybody else so that we're ahead of them rather than trying to play catch up. Oh, that's okay. There we go. Yeah, it's nice to know that uh, we've got a little audience and that people can enjoy it. And plus, I have to say I love people in the live chat because that means if people bring up topics or say, "Ooh, what about that?" I can respond to it directly because I like that direct interaction element. This is not the razzle-dazzly prepackaged superstructure that people who have much more sophisticated OBS connections and all the rest can do. But I make do with what I can on the freebie level. So anyway, we'll be putting the links up, obviously, to all that stuff on the Triceratops, and then we'll be launching next week into Stegosaurus. This, of course, is a Casey Luskin Discovery Institute 800 Plus bi-weekly discussion, and we are now on episode 9 of that little puppy. So there will be more on that. So we've got a paper from 2023 by Nadler on DVA retro transposons in Nature, which is open access, so I'll be able to put a link up to it. And it's one of those theodicy corkers because it involves retrotransposons that figure in microcephaly and epilepsy. So while they have contributed to the, quote, neoteny of the human brain, unquote, that would be their functional side, that's only adding to the evolutionary angle, as basically what doesn't kill you can maybe make some things stronger if it sticks around there long enough. So one of the ongoing features of this retrotransposon section issue relating to Luskin is the fact that when you've got retrotransposons popping into the system genetically, you have to deal with them. If you use my brain and ask smart questions, or even less smart questions. Remember, I'm just a B.A. in history. What do I know? I'm not a little PhD. I'm just a person who's terribly curious and loves to write stuff and organize things and learn shit. I cringe to think how little I knew on various topics 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago, let alone 30 years ago. So I'm in the delightful position of having a much better understanding of things because I interact with a whole slew of people who hone my understanding of stuff. And I try to follow that James Burke approach of clarifying it so that I can explain it to somebody else. Because if I can't explain it to somebody else, I was just talking with a friend about codon assignments and all of that. And I felt confident to be discussing that kind of a thing to clarify it so that they would better understand it. James Burke's approach from Connection series, the best science series ever, is that if you can understand a thing, you can explain it. Anything that can be understood can be explained. And it's the job of the explainer to do it in such a way that the person seeing it gets it and it's comprehensible. How much of that you dive into the little technical sidebar is another matter. But the one thing that we've approached, Jackson and I, in our work is that we have not shied away from diving directly into the technical literature. So instead of operating a kind of like the surface apologetics, we just bite the bullet and say, don't be intimidated by the technicals, that it's not magic, that there are contexts and reasons for why things they are at the technical level. And our job in our books, and hopefully you'll be seeing from Rocks Were There and Evolution Slam Dunk, that we're getting better and better at this stuff, of explaining things in ways that's clear and cogent to the reader. Plus, you are armed with the primary source technical literature, not some secondary redaction or general work. And that means that you're diving into the field in a way that's ahead of 80% of the creationist apologetics, because an awful lot of them are just rehashing the same tropes over and over and over again, or the same old technical literature, which if they misinterpreted it the first time, whoop. So we digress. So back on to dear old the theodicy of this. Now, this Nadler paper happened to make a very specific point about how the genetic components that they were investigating had originated naturally and with an evolutionary context. And they offered two papers, not recent ones, so this is not some news bulletin. Ostertag 2003, with the revealing title, SVA elements are non-autonomous retrotransposons that cause disease in humans, on the mechanism of how they get inserted. And then a 2005 paper from Wang, which unfortunately isn't open access, but there's a big chunk of it available in the science linkage section where the paper is theoretically available for like purchase. That I'll put the link up to anyway, even though it's not the full text, because it has quite a lot of the main skivvy of it, plus a chunk of the references. So you can get an idea what the hell's going on. Anyway, that it spotted 2,762 of these SVA elements, which is a tiny percentage of the total, and placing, quote, their origin back to the beginnings of hominid primate evolution approximately 18 to 25 million years ago. This makes SVA elements the youngest family of retrotransposons in the primate order, unquote. So there is a background context as to the what and when, and are we ever going to get a picture from the intelligent design movement of what the hell they think and when they think any design events were going on? If they're arguing that the air quotes junk DNA that they're obsessing on is designed elements, doesn't this mean a design event? And when? They are overall, intelligent designers don't agree that humans are hominids and that there is a common ancestry there to deal with. So they're going to have to come up with a superstructure where they could explain why these elements are showing up in us and hominids in their various altered forms and make sense of all of that. Spoiler alert, don't hold your breath that that's ever going to happen because there's just no there for them. So we're still not quite done. There is another paper on SVA elements on the 800 list, only one, by the way, and it's Quan 2013. It's way down their little list. So gradually, as I'm going through and doing these little cross checks, I'm checking to see if any of the material that popped up in my background research are on their list or not. And as you've already seen from previous weeks, once in a while, that's the case. So that means I'm picking off the material farther down the line, sometimes way down the line on their list. But rest assured, since I make a little note, a box around it to make sure and where we left off and all of that, that we will cover every damned paper on their list. And so this next one from Genome Info, they had identified that these elements appeared to be triggering something. That's all the paper did. And which we know a decade later in the Nadler stuff, that it certainly includes diseases. So what puzzles me is, are they being parsy about picking an older 2013 paper in the early stages of an area of research and not following up much on what was done with it as to what the hell was going on? Does this surprise me? Remember, none of the Discovery Institute list is annotated. They're not giving any context whatsoever as to what the hell these things mean, what their opinion of them is, what implications they're drawing from them. It's just a vomit of 800 plus, and exactly how many we'll find out because I have a spreadsheet and I'm counting up every single one of them as I go along, so that we'll have no doubt whatsoever as to how many there are in the end. And we'll also have a breakdown as to how many. Remember, the big point behind all of this was how many of these papers support the DI Luskin contention in the debate with Dan Stern Cardinale, that a big chunk, as in 50% or more, of these retrotransposons and signs and lines and all these other bits are functional. And their desire is that most of them are, 50% at least. But the fact is that so far, we were at 24 of these things so far. Only one paper, if you parsed it, might be taken as kind of leaving the door open for lots of functional junk DNA. And that's as good as they can get. One paper so far, which we discussed quite a few weeks ago. Now, maybe there will be some more down the line that will be filling that gap. Am I holding my breath that that's going to happen? Not particularly. So, in doing this little area of research, I encountered a paper by Carmi from 2011 on how retrotransposons can be domesticated. And that's another paper not on the 800 list. Though another one by the same authors from the very same year was on the list. And that was on the details of the editing process rather than that bigger picture. So again, we bring up the interesting question, why the one paper and not the other? Is it that the one paper is a very detailed, fiddly thing about mechanisms and giving no bigger context as to the evolutionary implications and structure of this, whereas the other 2011 paper was in fact on that very fact? Were they aware of this other paper? We don't know. But at the very least, the very fact that these two works are from the very same year and how anal retentive they seem to be scavenging down through the mix, I can't help but wonder whether or not they may have known about that and left it off. At any rate, we won't be leaving it off ours. And so you would see that the one paper on the mechanisms of how they identify things, none of that is, again, supporting the contention that most retrotransposons do anything. It's merely a mechanism for identifying if you can find if they do something. And remember, as Dancer and Cardinali would be pointing out at a technical level way above mine, is that no one is asserting that no retrotransposons or ERVs or any of these other things are doing nothing, that none of them do anything. No, quite to the contrary. Out of the millions of these things, it would be a darn surprise if none of it had actually got into things. And that's because the very processes of editing or dealing with, excising, cordoning off these various retro elements gets to be a dynamic system that can be used to identify hotspots on the gene and other things that can come to have a perfectly benign and useful characteristic, even though the source thing wasn't put there by any design and wasn't doing anything, and most of its little cousins lurking around inside the genome aren't doing a damn thing. The ALUs, of course, are the highly relevant ones because unless they have that little mutation that turns them into a README signal, they're absolutely benign and they can just fill up the genome, which of course alters the topology of the gene and therefore the way that it connects up and how easy it is. As we noted in a thing quite a few weeks ago, it's known that some of these little ALUs will lock together on opposite strands. And so that's part of the mechanisms of how these things can make connections, some of which will end up being not destructive, not entirely benign, like the one that I mentioned about the fact that our tail loss in primates apparently has to do with one of these weird connections shutting down the gene that's on the loop part. And that also has bad side effects at times as the organism goes on. The absence of that gene means it's not able to do stuff in a positive benefit, and so you can get some immune diseases and other things popping up. At any time, as Luskin, they're aware that some of this stuff has a disease context. They can't possibly avoid it in many cases because it's in the bloody titles of the papers, like that Nadler thing, where there was no doubt whatsoever that what it was context. And yet, it's never quite sinking in, which in many respects is cognitively pretty much the same thing that was going on with Bowen and the beaver stuff that Joel Duff was grappling with on their video. It's the callback superstructure to this kind of episode. That is there any difference between the blanket obtuseness of Carl Werner or Bowen repeating Carl Werner or Calvin repeating Karl Werner, and Casey Luskin, mantra-like, repeating this stuff that is just ingrained into the intelligent design mindset, and you just can't get outside of that superstructure. Another little area that I was doing some research on, because it pops up in relation to the human evolution chapter, that also connects up with that we alluded, I think, earlier. I think I had a section in one of the earlier episodes about Reeves, where Luskin is riffing off of Reeves accepting Randy Guliuz's creationist CET model, and how wacky all that was. Well, Reeves also figures in a circumstance where she was jousting with Erica Gutzik-Gibbon over a particular video Gutzik-Gibbon had done that was criticizing stuff, and then along comes Reeves saying, "Oh, no, this is wrong. Dear Erica doesn't seem to understand what this paper is." And so she had done a very extensive, Erica had done a very long breakdown as to why these various papers, and she posted like 4, 5, 6 different posts at the Discovery Institute on this. And Reeves as well was just having the same kind of dead brain moment that you find with Casey Luskin on these retrotransposons, or Bowen on the systematics of beavers in the Mesozoic, of which there aren't any Mesozoic beavers. And that is that Reeves couldn't separate out in her head that unconstrained genes have a different dynamic than constrained ones. Things that don't really matter, or that are pseudogenes and others, have no reason why they would be occurring other than just randomly in a genome, unless they were occurring as a unique event and being inherited by descendants. So the nested hierarchies that you can work out systematically match up independent of whether you use constrained or unconstrained genes, and that unconstrained part is inexplicable without common ancestry. Well, Reeves doesn't like that at all, and simply doesn't think about the unconstrained part. She just jumps back to the rock in the same way that Bowen just jumps back to, well, we didn't say beaver, we said beaver-like. And Luskin tunnel visioning in on, well, this teeny slice does something. It seems to do something. It's a terrible thing and it causes diseases, but we don't give a shit. So it's a fascinating process to see, and it reinforces that we're really talking about the same mental process, except they're talking about slightly different topics. And some of them are young Earth creationists, and some of them are intelligent designers. And you can find people, I suppose, if the gang at Reasons to Believe ever got too close to the data field, they might bump into some of these things. They do on like the flood and a few other areas where Ross just kind of goes off on a deep end. We'll be alluding to that in Rocks 2. Oh, there's going to be a lot of fun stuff in there. We want to keep this very, very much up to date, because the woo never ends. And then we've also got all the little sidebar, another little project that I'm working on, relates to a conference that's going to be here in Spokane in October, on Christian nationalism and its dire implications, and the whole Project 2025 bunch and all that. So I've been gradually compiling a cute little score sheet of the dramatis personae that belong to this block. And every day I'm encountering some additional discussions that bring up some new character names of various people that swirl around this area, and which politicians get brought up in that. And I'm trying to squeak them all in and taxonomize them as to how much of Christian nationalists they are and all the rest. And a thing that I did as well was adding up, just as I have in the creationist context of working out how many actual people are involved in this. I've got, 11, 12,000 creationist anti-evolution works in my reference field that's generated from a bit over 2,000 some odd people, but very tiny little set of maybe 60 or so fact claimants who are actually making the core arguments that everybody else is copying. Not a lot of people. Well, in this Christian nationalist context, although there are obviously going to be millions of people who are swirling around the base in the same way the anti-evolutionists are millions strong. But in terms of who's doing this stuff, it's a small body of people, bigger than the block of creationist core folk, but it's still less than 200 people. And they're everything from power brokers underwriting J.D. Vance's campaign to people who are behind the scenes manipulators at the Federalist Society. And then, of course, you've got the gang swirling around the Heritage Foundation and their Project 2025. And cross-connecting, for a brief time, the Discovery Institute was on the advisory board of that Project 2025 until the shit was hitting the fan regarding Donald Trump's support of it. That's when Trump was saying, I don't know anything about it at all, but I don't agree with all of it. Well, how do you know what you agree with or not when you don't know anything about it? There's more screwball deflection from ex-President Trump. But the thing is that you've got an enormous number on this list of people who are either ex-Trump administration officials, in part because the Council for National Policy was avid in staffing the Trump administration. And almost all of the people generating Project 2025 are directly associated with the Trump administration. So even when they are not explicitly Christian nationalists, they're just power hungry, Mitch McConnell and that crowd. Nonetheless, you still have a highly politicized, incestuous roller coaster going from the Council for National Policy through the Project 2025 and the Federalist Society, putting judges on the court, and the Trump administration and Christian nationalists running along, and these various conferences that are done. And it's a swirling bouillabaisse, but 200 people or less is not all that many. So they're a core cadre of Tortugan ideologues that this sheet should be helpful in producing a little bit clarity. I know Andrew Seidel, who's going to be a speaker here, and probably Onishi, who's another one of the speakers, will recognize almost everybody on the chart that I'm coming up with, but they may not have seen it organized in quite the same way before, where you can just kind of see it all as an Olympian total. So anyway, that's where we are on things. Let me put up our doodad here for our patrons to remind everybody that our little channel absolutely positively depends on the support and encouragement of the various people who are sticking with us, our colleagues and researchers and assistant researchers and friends, our new Professor Flynn, who just came on in the last week or so, and we go full out on this thing. We're very happy to see everybody help, and if more people can come on, if you can afford it. I always have to do the Dapper Dino proviso. Don't give a damn dime to the project if you can't afford it. Always put us below the necessities and things of life. But if you're doing pretty good and you got a little bit of scratch to come in and you feel the project is worthwhile and can come in as a patron for a couple bucks a month or whatever on a steady basis, then thank you very much. And we will be most welcome to show that your supporting us was not misplaced. So this is a wonderful ongoing project, a moving target issue. What we try to do in Volume 1, and we'll be continuing here in Volume 2, is to be as comprehensive as possible in relation to all that Answers in Genesis material, to make sure that there's all the primary arguments that are fielded in modern day creationism get a good solid rebuttal and coverage at one point or another in one volume or another. So, for example, the soft tissue thing is popping up in A Vengeance and Mark Armitage, all of that crowd. I still got to finish off the little segment. He keeps on spitting out new papers every so often, and that has to be brought into the scheme of things. We've restructured our chapter stuff here. I record cats, so I'm poor now. Exactly. Yeah, that everybody has their own priorities. There are circumstances. My gosh, people who live in areas where there's been flooding and tornadoes and heat waves and all the rest. There's a hell of a lot of expenses and worries, let alone people. We have an international audience that there are people who are in areas that are torn by war or troubles in a variety of ways. So, golly gosh, um, it's perfectly understandable that people must prioritize on everything. And I don't ever expect anybody to plump down anything, unlike, gee whiz, the $99 NFTs from Donald Trump. Have you seen, if you follow on Twitter or look at that kind of stuff, you can't help but have spotted some of this stuff because various people have called attention to some of these little NFTs that Trump puts out. Obviously, the billionaire needs money, but some of these, they the sheer hyperbolic hagiography of it is absolutely amazing. Um, he's depicted as this superhero. In fact, there's one of the things images were put up that had a very they had J.D. Vance and RFK Jr. and Trump and Vivek Ramaswamy and a couple other people up there as the kind of superheroes. I think it had Lauren Boebert as Wonder Woman. Whoa, nope. At any rate, somebody called it the Injustice League, and there's a bunch of little wags that came up on it. But it shows that, of course, Trump's ego absolutely loves that kind of stuff because it assuages his narcissism, which is really going to be spiraling farther out of control to the extent that he perceives that he's coming behind and he's not able to catch up. He can't get crowds as massive. There was a thing that found was so amusing when he was um, going to one of the recent speeches, I think in Wisconsin, where he was proclaiming that there were thousands of people crowding the streets as his motorcade was. Well, somebody put up a video of that motorcade dribbling along, and it, there were a few hundred people dribbled out along a rural road, fine and dandy, but not thousands of people. So you have to always wonder with Trump, how much of it does he know he's not seeing a lot of people, but he's just going to lie that there are, because that's the Roy Cohn style. And by all means, everybody should be using the bloody Roy Cohn hashtag. If you don't know about Trump's background with Roy Cohn, check it out. He taught him how to do the big lie back in the day. He's one of the naughtiest, nastiest characters in American politics, old associate of Joe McCarthy back in the 50s, and he became Trump's lawyer in the 70s and tutored him in the big lie, which is to always counterattack viciously whenever you're sued on anything, accuse your accusers of 3 times worse what you're accused of. And if you manage to lose the case, which he certainly did in that discrimination case in the 70s, just lie and say you won and plow ahead with it. Well, that mode has been his operation ever since. And it's just got progressively more hysterical as time goes on. The extent to which parts of Trump's brain is connected to actual reality on these matters is unclear. And I can tell you that there's probably going to be PhDs popping down the line in years to come of people who will be analyzing stuff in the years to come if he doesn't become president again and his finances continue to deteriorate and all the rest. It may very well be that it's going to start being studied more as a cognitive problem, and to find out what's going on in his head. If his finances really start imploding, what's going to prevent the kids from trying to take over that while they still got something to inherit, and try to indicate that their dad is mentally incompetent in the same way Donald Trump did his dad in the day to get control of that $400 million that he still had left. So it's a family tradition. So plus last of his big debts. Whoops, okay, I got the counter still going. Okay, I think we're still theoretically connected. Anyhow, so all of that stuff that we're collating and organizing for that Christian nationalist meet has larger implications, and what happens in the election has larger implications. Washington State's kind of in a sidebar where there's not a snowball's chance in hell that Trump is going to take Washington, just as Harris is not going to be taking Idaho. But in these various swing states, and if you live in one of those swing states, good gravy. Make sure that the people are registered and can vote and they can get to the polls if they're not civilized like we are in Washington State, where we have mail-in, like Utah. There's a whole bunch of other states that have that, to where voting is simple, easy, doesn't take a great deal of strain. You don't have to take time off from work or anything to do it. That's a very different dynamic than what we see in a lot of these states. But overall, Margaret Hoover did a show on PBS just this week that's confirming that our election system is fairly robust. There's a whole bunch of careful things in place, although you do have worries about the fact that a bunch of election denying nutballs are on the election commission there in Georgia, and may or may not try to interfere with the vote counting or the elector counting just to gum up the works. If the electoral vote's big enough for Harris, it won't matter what happens in Georgia. And there are nutballs in some of these other states, but like if they're like in Wyoming, it doesn't matter because that's going to go for Trump anyway. So anyway, it's an interesting couple of months now to see us through to the election and then through to January, to whether we still have a republic or whether it's become Trumplandia again. I don't want that to happen. So let me put my Rocks advert up. Come along, little screen. And let's go to there, and there we go to there, and our little share screen. And away we go. Watch away. And there it be. Remember, we put the links up to all the books. Paralogs of Phileas Fogg, which I'm busy working on the third one of those, as well as volume 2 of The Rocks were there. And there will be some longer term projects that Jackson and I are doing. We're not nearly done with our cute little things. That should keep us busy. Of course, he has actual career in college. He's a tutor and has his Masters of Science and working on as well. So many of them. I'm just a lowly little BA here with I'm in history and a retiree at that. But as long as we got our things to do and the resources to be able to keep doing it, and the ability to do a show like this, and so long as I don't have to pay for the bloody thing, I'm always amused at the fact that some people who are paying a lot for their video platforms, they can glitch up, the sound can glitch up, there's all sorts of messes that happen, and they're paying for this, where at least the restream thing that I'm doing here ain't costing me a bloody dime, and it gets what I want across, so away we go. And there's no commercials. No commercials. That's one advantage of being kind of low on the totem pole. Yipes, some of the weird ads that pop up on Pelagia and Forrest Volkai and these various other programs right in the middle of things often fit entirely opposed to the worldview that the videos are about, shows you how wacky that monetary-based video system is. Whereas, as far as I know, Nobody's interested in intruding into my little videos with a commercial, and we would like to keep it that way. So everybody keep a watch out for wooden penguins and stay safe the heck where you are. And we will be back next week. And in another 2 weeks, we will have another installment of our happy-go-lucky little Casey Luskin list. Don't hold your breath on them having any papers that support the position they're trying to make. So everybody stay safe and ending the stream. And next week, we will see you.